2.1 story chapter might be the best chapter we've had in Zenless Zone Zero, or at least the best in a while. I feel like after 1.4's story, the rest that followed, well, they weren't hated, but they weren't received nearly as well by the community, and for a multitude of valid reasons. First off, I am going to keep this as vague as possible, kinda just to not spoil anything, but also just to not make this video super long. But with that said, some of the background B-roll stuff might count as spoilers though, so if you want to avoid that, you can still listen to this as the audio, but maybe just don't watch the video, you know? Anyways, first off, there was complaints in some of the chapters prior to this one about poor pacing, trying to cram too much in too little time, sometimes taking away from the emotional story beats in particular because the plot just had to keep going with major event after major event, and you didn't have a lot of time to sit with those emotional moments. 2.1 does much better in this regard by taking on a less grandiose vibe to the plot overall. It's a much smaller scale story, I think. All the big names like Tops and the military and Porcelumix are still there, but they aren't so upfront and center. Instead, the whole first half of the story gets most of its entertainment value from establishing and exploring the new characters and their dynamics.
Monato, I've been meaning to say this for a while. You having that face and always talking like a goody two-shoes? What a waste.
It's kind of reminiscent of the really early chapters with the cunning hairs and whatnot. Anyway, apart from that finally feeling nice and fresh again at this point in the story, it helps the emotional bits towards the end hit just that much harder when you get invested in the characters and whatnot. Secondly, a lot of people weren't fond of the proxy role in its initial form being kind of done away with, as the main character was now navigating, I say in quotation marks because it felt more like just accompanying, the rest of the characters through the holo in person rather than with the HDD system. Also, Fairy and whichever sibling you didn't pick to be the main character basically get sidelined, and a lot of that faith and duo vibe from early in the game is kinda just lost. Well, 2.1 comes through again. Fairy actually does something and actually has some speaking lines in the main story again, albeit it's not very much, but I think it's a good sign that the devs are listening, maybe trying to work her in here and there, and maybe we'll see her more in the future. As far as the proxies themselves, it feels a bit less like you're just following the instructions of someone else and being led around. Instead, your role as a proxy seems to actually kind of mean something, and you are more directly involved in and needed for the exploration. And this time that actually goes for both siblings, as there's enough lines and dialogue from the one now using the HDD system to remind you that they're there with the group as well, via the Bang Boo. And they are just as important for helping navigate certain obstacles. Lastly, the previous chapter had an overall presentation issue, in that it just seemed very lazy. Lots of dialogue options that just led to saying the same thing, lack of comic panels and cutscenes, an abundance of tell don't show, particularly with the frequent use of those white text on black background sections. Super boring, very lame, awfully disappointing, right? But once again, this new chapter comes in to right some wrongs. We get more comic panels and cutscenes than in 2.0. We get less white text, black screens, and finally some dialogue options that actually prompt different responses. Just an overall, objectively improved story presentation, to be honest, and further evidence that the devs really cared to listen to player feedback and make the game more engaging based on it. The devs are goated, we love them. Anyway, a few other strong points that aren't tied to any complaints or feedback in particular, but I do find very enjoyable, so I want to praise and mention them as well. Damien's whole character, everything about him feels very unique. In a story where everyone is kinda a cookie-cutter good guy or bad guy, Damien actually feels like a more interesting character with some nuance to him. He's not as predictable as every other character for once, and I like that we have somewhat of an ally at times that doesn't share all of our same values and intentions. Just much more interesting. Additionally, the gameplay itself has, some new and creative elements added to it. Crawling through vents and being able to actually overhear the conversations of the enemies is super cool. Really adds to the immersion, I think. And it complements the more serious tone and direction that the story decides to go with at times, and just really makes it feel like a more story-focused experience. We also got more unique boss mechanics, which is always nice to keep the players from getting bored of the enemies or combat. Spicing things up is always nice. I will forever be in favor of this game being made just a little bit more challenging when it can and requiring a little more mechanical skill personally. If that's not your thing, I wouldn't be too worried. It's not anything like super difficult, just something new for this boss that isn't present in the other bosses. Also, we got peaked Yuri. Like, if you thought we peaked with Aster and Evelyn, we peaked here instead, okay? I'm just playing though, you don't gotta ship anything you don't want to, it's all respect, but it's there if you want it to be. I'm just playing though, I'm just playing. All in all, 2.1 has so far been pretty much perfect, delivering on everything that we've been asking for and feeling like the much needed return to form for the story in many ways. Also, it acts as a further solidification of the devs' dedication to the players and their expectations. That was really rhymey, it wasn't supposed to be. I didn't realize that when I wrote that part.
That's an awfully hot coffee pot.
Anyways, I'm really looking forward to the future of this game more than ever now with this chapter, and I hope we continue to get this type of quality throughout the game's lifespan. So yeah, that's about all I gotta say. If you haven't played the story yet, you should totally do that. If you have played the story yet, you should totally let me know what you think of it. But yeah, that's all for now. So, okay, bye.